it going, everybody out there? I want to give a big shout out to everybody checking in with us today with Decipher. Giving a shout out to Jan Bloomer, checking in saying hi from Amsterdam. Kim Brown, hello from LA. I'm just playing a few songs as we get started and work our way into our panel discussion for today. If you have any special requests, go ahead and throw those over in the chat. Here to have a little fun as we get started. Before we move into our official production for today, which is the Decipher panel chat, a little conversation about ransomware. Something that is not exactly fun, but we are going to make sure that you have some great, interesting information and gain some knowledge. Somebody out there, please go ahead and drop a comment in the chat. Let me know how it sounds out there so I know that you're out there with me.
See, I was resting at the park, minding my own business as I kick up the treble tone. On my radio tape, play a box right. Just loud enough so folks can hear us hype scene. Out of nowhere, comes a woman I'm dating. Investigation, maybe she was demonstrating, but nevertheless I was pleased. My day was going great and my soul was at ease until a group of brothers started bugging out, drinking the 40 ounce.
Okay, Kim said play Mariah Carey. I can definitely do that for you, Kim.
At first I ignored them, cause see I know the type. They got drunk, they got guns, and yes they wanna fight. And they see a young couple having a time that's good. And the egos wanna test the brother's manhood. So they came to test speech cause of my heritage and the loud bright colors that I wear. I was a target cause I'm a fashion misfit.
Andrew's checking in with us, true. Andrew Erickson, thank you so much. Seconding Mariah. We got some Mariah coming up.
Parts of my date's anatomy. Why, Lord, you brothers have to drill me? Cause if I start to hit this man, they'll have to kill me. You see,
Kiara, thank you so much. She said you sound great.
MC.
I just want to say welcome to everybody who's jumping in with us today for this Decipher stream, where we're going to have a panel That's entitled Highway Robbery to High Rise. Things that we're going to talk about today over this Mariah Carey background is that ransomware has really taken down hospitals, crippled those hospitals, shut down manufacturing plants and cities. It's become even more than a digital nuisance, but it's something disrupting healthcare, and there's so much going on with ransomware that we want to make you aware of so that you can protect yourself and learn a little bit more about the environment and what's going on. We'll get started with that in not too long. I guess we have close to another 10 minutes, and then I'll bring on the panelists, and we can start that up. I like that. Big shout out to Jamie Hart checking in from Dallas, Texas. Says you sound great, love the music choices. Not even my choice. You guys asked for Mariah Carey. I'm just answering those wishes. Shouts out Emily Boring. Are there any more requests out there?
Beautiful girl walking down the street.
We have maybe 2 or 3 more songs before I bring up the panelists.
It's coming down. She deserves a crown. But where is it now? Mama, listen. Senorita, I feel for you. You deal with things that you don't have to do. He doesn't love you, I can tell by his charm. But you can feel this real love if you just lay your mind and fast in my mind. Girl, don't you slow it down. If we carry on this way, this thing might leave the ground. How would you like to fly? That summer queen should ride. But you still deserve the crown. Well, hasn't it been found? Mama, listen. Senorita, I feel for you. Feel for you. You deal with things that you don't have to do. He doesn't love you, I can tell by his tone. He don't love you, baby, but you can feel this real love. Feel it. You just say it.
Gonna throw it back just a little bit with some Al Green for everybody out there checking in with us at the Cypher.
I'm so in love with you. Whatever you want to do is all right with me.
I'm actually looking over at some of our panelists on another one of my many screens here in the studio, and I see one of the panelists grooving, so I love that. I love to see that happening.
I want to spend my life with you. what I need. Let me be the one you come running to. I'll never be untrue. Oh, baby, let's stay together, loving you weather, times are good and bad, times are
Girls, what y'all trying to do?
Giving a shout out to Princeton Baker checking in from Atlanta.
Head to toe, so clear. Look out! Pop, pop, it's showtime. Showtime, showtime, showtime. Guess who's back again? Oh, they don't know. Oh, they don't know. I bet they know as soon as we walk in. Showed up, I'm wearing Cuban links. Designer mix. Inglewood's finest shoes.
So as we prepare to head into our panel, just wanted to let everyone know that during the discussion, you can go ahead and feel free to ask questions, drop your questions right in the YouTube chat, and the panelists will get those and be able to answer your questions.
Why you mad? Fix your face. Ain't my fault they all be jacking. Keep up. Players only. Come on, put your pinky rings up to the moon. Girls, what y'all trying to do? 24 karat magic in the air. Head to toe, so clear. Look out. Second verse for the hustlers, gangsters, bad bitches and your ugly old friends. I cannot preach, I cannot preach. I gotta show them how a pimp get it in. First, take your sip, do your dip, spend your money like money ain't shit. Ooh, ooh, we too fresh. Got to blame it on Jesus. Hashtag blessed. They ain't ready for me. I'm a dangerous man with some money in my pocket. Keep up. So many pretty girls around me and they're waking up the rocket. Keep up. Why you mad? Fix your face. Ain't my fault they all be jacking. Keep up. Players only. Come on, put your pinky rings up to the moon.
Well, sometimes I go out by myself and I look across the water.
All right, we have this song, and maybe I can sneak in a little bit of one more, and then we are going to bring up our panelists. I thank you guys so much for having me this afternoon where I am. Maybe morning or evening where you are. I've had a great time. I'm looking forward to learning some information. Keep me out of hot water. I know I count on my computers way too much. So I couldn't take it if somebody took one of them from me. So I definitely am ready to learn here myself.
Did you have to go to jail? But your house on up for sale. Did you get a good lawyer? Hope you didn't catch a 10. Hope you found the right man who'll fix it for you. Are you shopping anywhere? Change the color of your hair. Are you busy? And did you have to pay that fine? You was dodging all the time. Are you used to be busy?
right, everyone, that time has now come. I am bringing in our panelists for today from Decipher, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
All right, thanks, Martin. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our Decipher webinar. We'll be discussing the shifting tactics of ransomware gangs and the types of organizations they're targeting and how enterprises can best defend themselves against this threat. I'm Dennis Fisher, Editor-in-Chief of Decipher, and we're fortunate today to have three very experienced and knowledgeable panelists. First, let me introduce Wendy Whitmore. She's the global lead for IBM Security's X-Force Iris team, which handles incident response, threat intelligence, and proactive services for clients around the world. Wendy has nearly 2 decades of experience in the security field and is a former special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Our second panelist is Keith McCammon, CSO and co-founder of Red Canary. Keith runs Red Canary's product development team and is also responsible for the company's security strategy. Keith has extensive experience dealing with complex security incidents in both the public and private sectors. Finally, please welcome Chester Wisnowski, Principal Research Scientist at Sophos. Chet has been in the security industry for more than 20 years in a variety of roles, and right now is in the business of distilling and analyzing the enormous volume of attack data from Sophos Labs to find relevant patterns and trends. Welcome, everyone. All right, so we're going to be covering a wide variety of topics across the ransomware spectrum here, but I wanted to start with just kind of a general question, maybe start with you, Wendy. What do you think is driving this shift in tactics from ransomware gangs that are moving from, they kind of started out years ago going after individual consumers, then kind of moved to the enterprise and large organizations? Is it just specifically a way to make more money, or is there more behind that shift?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Dennis. So, I think the reality is that ransomware has become a very critical business problem, right? And we've seen attackers shift, as you said, from doing more kind of commodity-based infections, maybe less targeted infections, to those which are highly strategic and highly targeted and well-researched, right? So the reasoning behind it, I would say the number one factor is probably because they're making money from these, right? These attacks are successful. And as long as attackers have the ability to do so, then I think they're going to continue to do so, right? And we're going to see these expand even more. Now you've got that coupled with the pandemic, in which you have this increased attack surface, right? And so you have more users throughout the world connecting to devices and systems remotely that may now no longer be behind, right, a traditional network firewall, if you will. And you've got users who maybe aren't used to working on systems and having those systems kind of having the visibility of endpoint protection that we'd like. And attackers are aware of just the chaos that's going on and can really take advantage of that. And I think if we've certainly seen more of these attacks over the past few months. I mean, the level of volume we've seen of work in 2020 on the incident response spectrum is more than we've seen in all of 2019, right? From our team, I know a number of other industry teams are seeing that. So I think we're going to continue to see this problem on the rise.
Keith, is that the same sort of thing that you're seeing? I know when we talked earlier, you mentioned that almost all of the incident response that you guys do these days is based around ransomware attacks.
Yeah, we as a company, we don't do incident response directly. Thankfully, I try to make sure our customers don't need it. But yeah, we work with a wide variety of partners, and that's definitely been it's the overwhelming majority of their work, right? And we got to chat about this a little bit ahead of time, just the and like the overall impact that's had on the incident response industry. Like I can't imagine what it's been like, for Wendy and folks like that who see these trends like year over year. It's been skill sets, like way of approaching incident response, and also how you have to just think about protecting, gaining visibility and protecting enterprises has changed pretty significantly as a result of this. Factors
behind these ransomware attacks changed, or is it the same types of attackers that have been running ransomware for 10 years or so.
Are you trying to take us into an attribution discussion?
Absolutely not. In general,
there certainly seems to be a shift, a stratification of skills, right? So you go back into the beginning of this modern ransomware wave was around 2013, and everybody and their brother had a ransomware attack, and mostly hitting the desktops, as you said in the introduction, right? But the ones with skills have moved up market into these big enterprise attacks. It's not to say that there's no desktop attacks anymore, but that there aren't still $5,000 attacks hitting small businesses around the world on a regular basis. It's the ones that have skills who kind of moved into this enterprise space, and so some of these actors are well known for a very long time, right? There's obviously new ones that have skills coming in as well, but some of them are well-known entities.
We'll say that to your point, Chet, like years ago, you remember when it was mostly individual attacks, and then moved into SAM, and there were kind of a few of these groups on the fringes that were really like targeted attacks and really classic breach tactics, and now that's definitely changed, where you have you've definitely got whoever they are, like much greater number of folks who are executing what are like really traditional breaches end to end, right? Just with a slightly different objective, but running intrusions the way that you used to see from a smaller number of much more just better organized and more thoughtful adversaries. So that's been it's been pretty wild to see the uptick there, right?
A lot of that sort of original wave of ransomware attacks that we saw, especially against individuals, were kind of driven by malicious spam emails, phishing emails that might have, an infected attachment, kind of the classic malware attacks that everybody is used to. And those were pretty effective against consumers. Do those still occur in the enterprise space? Do you guys still see that as opposed to the more high level get into the network first and then maybe ransomware some machines later?
Well, so I think, Dennis, a couple things here. I'll start on that. It's just the initial infection vector, right? We still see that predominantly being things like spear phishing of users, which you mentioned. A lot of emails. We see vulnerabilities that are known in many cases for some time, right, that are leveraged. And then we see a lot of cloud misconfigurations as well being implicated as kind of the initial go-to in the organization. And then what I think is interesting, though, there's a lot of different topics within it that are interesting, but there has been a shift in some cases we've seen to where the attackers will really take a lot of time, to Keith's point, being kind of more of a traditional either nation state or highly organized criminal actor, right? They typically will then take time to really get to know the organization, to do a lot of fingerprinting of devices, of accounts, of understanding, how the organization works before they then look to deploy malware, right? And deploy the actual ransomware. In some cases, that's a couple weeks. In more cases, though, we're seeing that time frame be a couple months, right? From that initial infection to a much longer term. And during that time, not only are they collecting information about the organization and establishing a foothold, but they're really looking to also potentially take information that they can use for some purpose later, right? Whether that's now an extortion component, maybe it's a destructive malware attack, or maybe it's, very targeted types of, we went after this financial data and we're going to, perpetrate or enact the ransomware right before your quarter closes. So now you can't actually get to quarterly earnings. We're seeing a much more targeted and specific approach from these actors today.
Yeah, I would say it kind of that observation you had is super interesting, right? Which is that it used to just to your question, Dennis, the tactics or the entry points haven't changed in 30 years, right? But yeah, it's really just that, it used to be, send the phishing email, somebody takes the bait, immediate lockup, right? And you get paid. And there was a lot of instant gratification. And now it is that this is probably the same with a bunch of trends, but the vectors and the techniques and things like that change over really long periods of time. All that you're seeing is just like the time between, success, somebody taking the bait and, and them kind of executing to their final objective is like, that's the piece that seems to be, that's where most of the change takes place. Right. And unfortunately, that's where it's really, really tough to detect. Right? If you don't find it up front and deal with it, now you're in this weird area where like they may decide they want something right away. They may decide they want something in like days, weeks, or months. And that's a really that's the tough position to be in, and probably where I think like the most like iteration and like evolution has taken place over the course of the last year or two, right? Is just like what they do once they're inside and how they think about, effectively like how to maximize their profit, right? Which is the only goal. So.
Fortunately, their initial entry is not Flash and Java anymore. At least we've had that change. But to my surprise, so often is we're also just seeing tons of password reuse amongst administrators and service providers. Quite a few of the incidents we've looked into recently, it was literally passwords from the LinkedIn breach being stuffed into RDP as an initial foothold, right? And it's not always an admin in that initial foothold necessarily, but just simple stuff again. I mean, basic hygiene things usually are the initial first step.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to ask about is we generally think of enterprises as being better defended than, say, just an individual person. Even somebody who's security and tech aware, like we all are, or our audience probably is, we tell people not to reuse passwords, use two-factor where they can, and all of these kind of basic hygiene type things that you just mentioned, Chet. But if we're seeing password reuse in the enterprise and things like that, how high is the bar? I guess what I want to ask is how aware are enterprise security teams about the way that ransomware gangs have shifted to focus on them? I mean, there's lots of high profile cases out there, but I wonder how much it's on the minds of these teams specifically as opposed to just kind of other daily threats.
My perspective, it's a maturity model thing, right? Like a lot of organizations any organization that started to go down the zero trust path is way ahead of the game on most of these things because they've already had to have a serious think about identity, right? How are they going to do access control? What type of multi-factor? When? For what type of devices are you allowed to access? Take an admin portal of a major social media platform, for example. Perhaps that should have some controls around it. Those kinds of things, the companies that have done zero trust seem to be experiencing things less because it's less about the patching and more about multi-factor and identity and authentication for accessing these systems remotely and being able to spot anomalies more easily because of those controls. And companies who haven't gone down that path and are more traditional have a real blind spot because without multi-factor, I mean, the truth of the matter is if you've got 5,000 employees, 3,000 of them are password reusing probably, right? Like it's almost impossible to control. There's no way to know what they're doing at home or what their Yahoo password is. That's I think, one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I think to his point, really, when we look at these attacks, where there have been so many attacks that have stolen credentials, right, over the past number of years, and we see that 60% of the attacks we respond to are actually either leveraging a previously stolen credential or they're leveraging a known vulnerability that's out there and that has been out there for some time. So that's a huge amount of data that's just kind of sitting out there, that's being bought and sold on the internet, and is actually, as you mentioned, users aren't resetting their passwords, and how many of them are reusing from, a personal account to their work accounts, and hopefully not to those administrative accounts. But, the reality is that I don't think it's so much that organizations aren't aware of ransomware attacks, because I think they very much are. But these types of attacks are so similar to the whole playbook and the strategy and operations that a nation state actor that's very well funded or a highly funded organized crime actor is going to use. And so this is just yet one more type of attack that organizations need to defend against. Mm-hmm. And I think it does go back to a lot of the fundamentals you mentioned about just good basic hygiene. One of the things, in addition to the multi-factor authentication on remote devices and having a plan and testing it, one of the things we talk often about in ransomware cases is having backups of your most critical and sensitive data, making sure that you have them offline. So can't do that for all data. It's way too expensive. But certainly for that's most critical, which you can't operate your business with, or maybe you can't serve patients without, then that data really needs to be available offline so that you've got a copy and you don't have all your backups that are connected to the network also get impacted by and encrypted by the ransomware as well.
And maybe to connect this to the earlier part of the conversation, Wendy, you mentioned the, just shift in how people are working. And obviously, like what you and Chet were just calling out in terms of, hygiene, awareness, things like that. It's like that maybe is where like the intersection of those two things has been really interesting over the last few months, because I think and if you agree, like for sure with what Chet said, like companies that have, started from cloud first, zero trust, a lot of newer companies have an advantage here because like they've just built their infrastructure and grown organically, based on those principles. But I think where a lot of the pain has come from, we've definitely seen this through like our incident response partners, has been organizations that, haven't come up like basing their infrastructure and their growth on those principles, and have had to put in place a lot of remote access infrastructure in a short amount of time. Like that's exactly where you get the problems that the two of you were just describing, right? Which is like these things, like IT projects in general, forget about security projects, but like IT projects just don't they didn't have the advantage of going through all of the thoughtful planning and testing and, things like accounting for disaster recovery and backups. And like, that's been the really unique shift over the last 5 to 6 months, has been seeing, how companies had to respond in terms of standing up infrastructure to enable remote work. Definitely under less than ideal circumstances from like a security and technology standpoint. And that's where all things become COVID sooner or later today, I guess. Like, don't want to go down that path, but it definitely it's been really acute where you just had so many organizations that had to respond to, employee mobility really rapidly. And then like what Chet and Wendy were just describing, like those are the very specific problems you're going to end up having, right? You have infrastructure that no one knows about, hasn't thought about, hasn't gone through the typical like implementation and testing rigor. Adversaries are going to do what adversaries are going to do, and like they're not going to work any harder than they have to, right? And that's probably true of like a ransomware gang or a nation state, right? So it's been a neat like coming together of all these different like situations.
And some of those problems that you just described, Keith, with having to enable this remote workforce very quickly. There's, probably shadow IT out there that the admin team doesn't know about, the security team doesn't know about, where are our backups, that kind of stuff. That was all accelerated, obviously, in the last 6 months. But some of the most damaging attacks that we've seen over the last few years against enterprises or large organizations have been against things like government agencies, municipalities, and, I'm thinking of hospitals and healthcare organizations as well, which a lot of times those kind of organizations don't have the IT budget to upgrade their stuff very quickly. Or in the case of a hospital or a medical office, a lot of that stuff just can't be changed. Like you can't touch those hardware and software to upgrade them because they're in mission critical places. How much of a challenge is that for those organizations that are now, if they are trying to think about the ransomware threat, they've got that extra layer of, well, we don't have the budget, or, we can't really patch all this stuff because it's running somebody's ventilator.
I like to think of it like the same way we dealt with Windows XP being deprecated 6-7 years ago. Put some sort of layer a protective layer of glass around the thing that has to have it, and make your authentication decisions outside of that in order to get to that container, if you will. And one of the local firms here that we were dealing with back then had a multi-million-dollar CAD/CAM machine for students to learn on at a local university. They don't have the money to buy a new one just because Windows XP is deprecated. But you put the Windows XP computer on its own network that you can only get to through Amazon Workspaces. And then you put your authentication on the Amazon Workspaces to ensure you're controlling access to that environment that can't be patched, that is legacy, that's too expensive, whatever it is. And I think that's one approach you can take to try to maintain those legacy systems, but still isolate them enough that they're not likely to be at the front lines of somebody attacking them from the internet.
That's a good point. How much has the payment scenario changed as the attackers have moved to these more high-profile targets? And obviously, enterprises generally have more money, and so the obviously the ransom demands go up when they realize that they're inside a corporate network as opposed to somebody's home laptop. But is it still all Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency, or have things changed at all?
So I want to, I guess, cite kind of a case that we worked recently, just to your comments on payment, right? I think we've seen a huge shift in that over time for a wide variety of reasons, right? You mentioned that organizations are dedicating more funding to this. Some cyber insurers pay a component of for your insurance, will do payouts right on ransom payments. And so organizations are generally more prepared to deal with this. That said, I mentioned that, attackers are tending to get a little bit more sophisticated in terms of their targets. And I think ransomware is oftentimes just part of the playbook. It's not, the end all be all. And so they're prepared to accelerate or increase kind of their tactics if needed, if they don't get what they want. So we recently dealt with an organization who handled sensitive client information, and the attackers specifically went in, and forensic analysis revealed that as we looked into it, they specifically traversed the network with the intent of getting access to this client information, then encrypted it. And ultimately, their first ask from the client organization was for $25 million payment in ransom. Now, conversely, just 3 years ago, we worked for an organization that was a Fortune 10 company that had actually their Q3 financial data encrypted, and ultimately was not able to close the quarter. It was a public company, clearly, and wasn't going to be able to report earnings to the street or do any number of things that have regulatory ramifications without access to this data, which they hadn't backed up. Conversely, in that case, these attackers asked for the equivalent of $1,000 in Bitcoin at that time. They clearly could have asked for a lot more, right? Had they known what they actually had. And so I think we've seen that change. And so payments have changed. Primarily, we are still seeing attackers asking for payment in Bitcoin. And that's become kind of its own secondary industry, right? Of organizations who are very familiar with setting up the infrastructure that can outsource it and do those type of things. So all these things said, I am by no means advocating for payment of ransomware. I think we'll get into that discussion, kind of pros and cons and a lot of misconceptions about it as well. That, if you pay, there's some guarantee you're actually going to get back your data, or you're not going to have to do additional work, which is not true. But that said, the attacks have really evolved in a level of maturity, I would say.
I think they've got a lot of experience laundering the Bitcoin and knowing how to process it, all that kind of stuff as well. There's a bit of a weird embedded space now where the victims and the insurance companies know how to acquire Bitcoin in order to potentially pay a ransom, and the criminals have got their pattern down of how they're going to process the payment when they receive it. So even though it would probably be safer for them to use something like Monero or another type of cryptocurrency, it's unlikely to change just because it's sort of momentum.
Yeah. Chet, earlier you mentioned the kind of maturity model for organizations in terms of their response. It kind of depends how mature they are in their security in general. I wonder how much, and Wendy, you mentioned the maturity of the attackers. How much have you seen the attack groups mature in their tactics over the last, say, year or two as the focus is really honed in on enterprises? Have they gotten better at what they're doing, I guess, for a lack of a better phrase?
Certainly refining, right? And even when we saw the consumer stuff, right, when they were hitting around people's desktops for their photos of their grandkids, first it was $400, then it was $1,000, and then they had to find the price in the market, right? And if settled at $700 seemed to be the sweet spot that they could get people to pay. And not only have we seen that pricing stuff going on in the criminal enterprise market, but we're also seeing the extortion side of it, which I think you kind of alluded to as well, Wendy, with, what data do I have and how much money might I be able to get a ransom for based on the kind of information I'm able to access. And we even had a victim that we're going to be publishing some information about soon, that the attackers got into their HR systems and acquired social security numbers and other private information about their employees. Were contacting employees directly, trying to get the employees to put pressure on IT to pay the ransom so that they wouldn't release their personal information, right? That was a one-off. Is that a one-off? Well, if it works, we'll probably start seeing that as a pattern over and over and over again. If it doesn't work, they try it, they move on to the next thing, right? There very much seems to be a lot of beg, borrowing, and stealing going on between the groups. And unfortunately, I think when we're trying to publish information to better prepare enterprises to know what they're in for and how to defend themselves, we're also unfortunately sharing one criminal group's tactics publicly in a way that another criminal group goes, that's a good idea, and then they run off and take a new idea and use it to extort people even more. So it's a fine balance there, but it is interesting watching. There's certainly a maturity, and there's a whole bunch of groups that have none of this skill at all that are still out there creating a little bit of noise in the background. But the skilled ones are smart enough to borrow from one another, and they're even starting to leverage the press, right? I mean, you look at a group like Maze. They're just PR hungry, right? They want to be known as the bad guys so that you crap your pants when your network's hit and you know it's Maze, right? And they want you to know they're going to go to journalists.
Yeah, that part of it to me, being a journalist that writes about this stuff is always something that we think about. How much kind of the balance of the value of informing people about it and giving these attack groups what they want is a little, publicity for them. So that, as you said, people see them as the boogeyman and realize, oh God, Maze is on my network. I better pay up. They're the real bad guys. And I guess that's probably a good way to segue into maybe talking about the families of ransomware that you guys are seeing. Has that changed much in the last couple of years as the focus has shifted to the enterprise, or is it all still kind of the familiar ones that we've been hearing about for 8 or 10 years?
Oh, go ahead, Wendy.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I'll kick it off, but I think we've seen just a wide variety, right? So we've seen so many more groupings of it. Some of them are simply iterations of previous types of malware samples and families that we've seen. But many of them are new groups, right? And some of them have more recently been targeting specific types of industries or infrastructure. So, ECANs, also known as Snake, ransomware is something we've seen really predominantly hitting the manufacturing and automotive industry. ICS SCADA systems, those are certainly targets of that type of ransomware. And that's just one of many that we're now dealing with. And I also think you're seeing kind of a convergence of nation states leveraging ransomware just, as needed in order to kind of have it as an additional tool in their toolkit, right? And then you're seeing vice versa, ransomware attackers and deploy additional add-on techniques. So things like moving to extortion or moving to destructive tactics or naming and shaming, right? You mentioned Maze and the publicity and the PR side of it. So there are just a lot of different angles now. So I think the game has gotten a lot bigger, or at least the competition that we're playing in has gotten a lot bigger from that perspective.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting to think about. You mentioned kind of maturity, right? Which is a great way to sort out. Like that's one way I think we've been able to start to bucket and like name and identify some of these groups, which are just some are exceptionally well organized. Like they have a particular target set. They have they've got a really refined toolkit. So once they get an entry point into a network, they can move laterally, do discovery, and do these things really quickly and efficiently. And yeah, some of the others are very much grouped around what they want, right? Their MO, Maze is a good example, right? Their MO is extortion and PR, right? And just they're gaming that part of the system, and they're less concerned with who they go after, right? And then you've got these other groups that it seems like all the infrastructure and just that process of learning from one another, commoditizing tools, right? And there's the entire underbelly of this that is just licensing these toolkits to whomever, right? They don't care. And so it's kind of that whole ecosystem just seems to have really taken hold in the last year or so, where they're learning from one another. Toolkits are more available, again, licensable in the same way as software. objectives are really dialed in. And then, you have some groups that just figure out, a target, like a target profile, whether it's like types of systems they have or industry, and just really choose to like put their foot on the gas. But it's overall, I think, maturity, like the word maturity is probably like a great way to think about it. Just like it is really like evolved into like what I would consider to be like it's a very high functioning industry, sadly. Like it's got like supply chain just like everyone else. They've got like their tech support systems are like becoming like more consistent and widely used. PR, like they've just kind of got like they've got all the mechanics and all the attributes of pretty much any other industry, right? It's just that they happen to not have like anyone's interests in mind.
Right.
And the licensing bit's interesting, Keith, because it's to the point where they've got it so polished, like Dharma, that there's 20 different people out there using Dharma, and we can't tell them apart because they're literally following a script, not just a script like a PowerShell script, but like a human script, where this is how you do the attack. And it's so similar from script kiddie A to script kiddie D that what they're doing that you can't even tell they're two different script kiddies some of the time because they've got the process down so much that it's just literally cranking out victims, which is unfortunate.
The commoditization causes all sorts of problems, right? It is. It's like it's super when everyone has access to the same thing, and it's like I would say like our understanding of all of these groups and their tactics has gotten to be is much better now too. I think we're doing a better job sharing information publicly as vendors, but also like on the media side. And so as adversary A, like you actually have you have a pretty thorough understanding of what adversary B is doing, all the way from their tools, because you can acquire them, up to their tactics, how they represent it in the media, what IR firms know. And it becomes really easy to just say, hey, I want to look like adversary A, or I want to look like adversary B. And so, like the implications of that for attribution are pretty wild, right?
Well, it's partly what's frustrating too, because we know the tools and we know the tactics. We're just trying to get everyone to listen, which is, I guess, why we're all here on the panel today. Like, if you can learn the things that we're sharing with the world, you can put those defenses in place to protect your network from these guys. Yeah. This is not super secret stuff that nobody knows about. We know what the tactics are. We know what you need to watch for. We know the types of things you need to do when you're doing your threat hunting to identify and protect your assets from these things. And we're all in a position where we would like to be further along in our own maturity of defense, but a little bit of time spent in taking all this information about the adversary could go a long way to preventing them from getting onto your network.
Yeah. Without going too far down the attribution rabbit hole, how much do the organizations that you all work with care about attribution, on a scale of 1 to 10, as opposed to let's just find out what happened, fix it, and move on with our lives?
I think that's a great question. And honestly, it really varies from organization to organization. I think some organizations that, again, on the maturity theme, right, on maybe that's the word of the day, but those that are more mature that maybe have a team of people who are dedicated to, on doing threat analytics and understanding them, are usually going to be much more concerned about who's responsible for this, what group is in here, what can we learn from their tactics, and how do we better improve our organization. There's other organizations who say, hey, we just want to get the situation fixed. We want to get back to business as quickly as possible. And we want to learn kind of the fundamentals of the attack so that we can make sure we're not susceptible to that in the future, but we're less concerned. That said, overall, I think as a general rule, we're seeing more and more organizations who are really interested in attribution, who care about it, who are interested in making sure that they're sharing what they know with their peers and with the larger community so that others can learn from it. And I think that's been, fantastic to see the progress, right? We're not at the point where, it used to be, which was explaining why threat intelligence matters or what it is. I think a great example of it, kind of unrelated to ransomware, but great example of it in the cyberspace earlier this year, was the assassination of the Iranian general. That week, I think for us anyway, really changed a lot of the dynamic of the conversations we were having with our clients We in particular do a lot of Middle Eastern and Iranian threat research, and our clients and our client representatives were coming to us to ask, hey, from their clients, the questions were, hey, we're really concerned with what just happened. What's the potential impact of a cyber attack from Iranian threat actors? So it became a very real discussion that kind of was no longer this hypothetical, attribution, who really cares who it is? But it was, how can I prevent my organization from getting attacked? What do I need to be aware of? And I think we're seeing that, and certainly as more of these ransomware cases gain more kind of publicity or notoriety, I think we're going to continue to see that increase.
There's a thread in there I would love to pull, and related to attribution is that it is funny. You rewind like 10 or 15 years, and everyone wondered who, right? And yeah, that's absolutely like critically important to some organizations, and for different reasons, depending on your level of maturity and your ability to act on it. But I think maybe like the most interesting shift in attribution has been, focusing on like the earlier part of what you said, which is, using it, not so much the who, but how, right? And like really attributing it less to an individual or a named actor, and doing a better job maturing how we approach attribution from a technique and tactic and like objective standpoint. So less about who did it, and a lot more about like really having a good understanding of like how it happened, right? So attributing it to like a root cause that you can go fix. And that is, and I think we've, obviously like the rise of attack and things like that, through MITRE, right? As like, that's driven that way of thinking, I think like really like forward in a really positive way, which is to get everyone, it's important to know who sometimes, it's always important to know like how, right? Because that's the thing you're going to go at, like on the back end of these incident response engagements, like, get it contained and clean it up is step one. And that can be really difficult. Steps 2, 3, 4 are usually the much harder ones, which are, make sure we understand how this happened. Make sure we'll understand like if it's coming the next time. And make sure that, like we effectively plug the leak, right? Like figure out how this thing happened, address that root cause, like put better controls in place, put better detection in place, like get great visibility. Like that level of attribution, I think, has like improved a ton as a result of just like information sharing frameworks and a whole bunch of reasons. But like that's the really positive shift in attribution, I think, that like we've seen over the years, is that like focusing on attributing to the things that matter and the things that you can control in every case. And then in the best case, you can go beyond that.
Most of us can't launch missiles at Tehran in return for them coming after our data, right? So the question is, does it really matter if the way that Tehran's going to come in is through spear phishing? If I harden myself against spear phishing, I'm actually protecting my organization from not just Iran, but 50 other things that are out there that are also using spear phishing as a tactic, right? And I think emotionally, all of us are a 10 on the 1 to 10 scale of wanting to know who came and tried to lock up our data or incapacitate our enterprise. But technically, most of us actually much more care about the tactics and how it's happening, because every one of those doors you close against any given threat actor, you're actually closing it for a whole bunch more of them as well. So it doesn't make sense to focus on the threat actor as much as the tactics.
Yeah. And when you mentioned zero trust and stuff like that earlier, and that's been like one of the most common questions we get from folks, which are, is it worth starting to adopt this model? Should I move to cloud thing A, B, or C? And like, they're all seemingly like tactical, and like the response that we try to the thing we try to reinforce for folks when we get approached about that is always just like any one of these things. You mentioned the point before of like, how do you protect against these? And a lot of it is just depth, right? Like if you have an MRI machine, no, you can't do a bunch of like obvious things like patch it or change it, but like you can put some stuff in front of it. And, like thinking through like what we're talking about here, which is, just trying to like really address root causes, like build good protection and visibility related to phishing or the common vectors, you're going to see. And then on the, when you think about like what that means for just like control or technology adoption, right? Like at a really high level, like go put in place, like there's particularly when like thinking about like zero trust, like wrapping a lot of like wrapping a lot of like really strong protection around like endpoints and identity and like data access and things like that, and less so around infrastructure. I think the answer in every one of these cases of like, should I go do thing A, B, or C is like, yes. You can afford it, right? Because every one of them, like zero trust being, or those principles being a good example, you can go do that today. If everyone comes back to the office in a year, you're still 100 times better off, right? Like you've just got like a much more like solid foundation to build upon. And I think that's like, again, just kind of get to a root cause, understand what you've got to build for, and like put the fundamental, the right technologies and controls in place. And like, you might not need them forever in the sense that you need them now because of mobility or pick your reason. But you'll be better off for it forever, right? If you just think about things in that way.
Yeah. So I've got a few questions from the audience, and one of them is kind of right along that line, Keith. Talking about multi-factor authentication, someone asked, given the number of recent attacks involving MSPs, how can an organization force their third-party vendors to use MFA to access their networks? Is there a good way to do that aside from just economic pressure, I guess?
I mean, yeah, that's a funny one. I hadn't really thought about forcing a third party to do it. If you have a third party that doesn't want to do it and they're a security provider, you should probably just fire them, right? And this, I'll just take the extreme position, pick a fight. You should fire them. But we definitely, we had a customer just a couple of weeks ago that had an issue with, they had a managed service provider, like an IT service provider, that had subcontractors on the back end of their infrastructure, and classic supply chain problem, right? Like company A, good. Company A has companies B, C, and D on the back end, and that came and bit them, and they ended up, maybe the short answer to that is contracts, right? Their response to this, they had a tactical incident response, right? The technical part of it. And then most of their incident response was, okay, somebody go look at all the contracts for all these suppliers and make sure that everyone has a clause in there that says you must use multi-factor authentication. And that was it. And sadly, I don't know if there's another way to actually enforce it, right? But other than just peer pressure and shaming.
Yeah. So a couple of payment questions. We did want to talk about kind of the pay or don't pay question. So I guess now's a good time to jump into that. And there's no one answer to the question of how organizations should approach this, but when inevitably your customers ask you for advice on this kind of thing, how do you approach that question with them? I'm sure there's lots of factors that go into it, especially do you have backups that you can get to? But how do those conversations generally go?
Well, so I think one of the first things that I would want to address would just be this common misconception of pay or don't pay, right? Meaning that I think a lot of organizations still believe if they pay, then all their problems are solved and they don't actually have to incur the additional expenses of paying to fix the root cause. So not only do they potentially then pay the ransom, but if they do that, then they begin this whole process of looking to decrypt files, of get the data back, of actually replicate them, piece them back together. Depending on the size and the volume of data that's encrypted and stolen, you could be talking days to weeks to months in some cases of actually looking to restore this data. And you're actually incurring a lot of expenses to get that done, right? So there has to, I think in all of the decisions we advise our clients on, it's going to be about risk. How much risk, are you willing to incur, and how much can we afford in this circumstance? And so from that perspective, not only then have they now begun this whole journey of this, dialogue and the actual kind of technical need to restore the data sets, but then they still have to fix the root cause, right? Whatever enabled this situation to occur, whether it was, spear phishing emails, or it was some remotely accessible device that didn't have multi-factor authentication, or most likely a wide combination of a lot of different factors. Those need to be fixed as well. So they're not then just going through the same conversation in the weeks following this decision. So I think that organizations really need to, be aware of that. And when we look at like the overall cost of these breaches, a huge component is actually just all of the work efforts that go around getting them back to business. So that said, that then kind of goes back to our earlier points of if you can make sure that if you understand what your most critical data is, you've got it backed up offline, and we don't even need to go through these conversations, right? Ideally, yeah, you still need to fix root problems, but you can get your organization up and running in a much faster time frame than had you not have access to any of that data.
We recently published a study that showed the cost of recovery, whether you pay the ransom or not, is the same, right? So if you cannot pay the ransom, you're just saving the ransom money. It's literally what it is. Like, if you've got other ways to get access to your data, you still have to rebuild your servers because they've all been compromised and are untrustworthy at this point. So even though you're going to get your data back, you still got to rebuild all your databases. You got to rebuild your CRM, whatever it is that they've been getting their business into. I think the more complex problem that's more recent, or the last 6-8 months, is now the extortion component of this. It's no longer just about getting the data back. It's now about the public embarrassment, reputational damage, the other aspects of it as well, because the complexities of decrypting your stuff after it's been messed with is a very expensive process in and of itself, but you may decide that you need to do that. But even when you do that, you've got the extortion component. And what's been raised the last couple of weeks that's interesting is since the Department of Justice issued sanctions against some of these threat actors, are you actually breaking international law by paying the ransom? That's another whole aspect, potentially depending on who these threat actors are. And I guess that's one case where attribution really does matter. Having an idea who you're actually giving the money to may actually be a legal matter. Although I would hope we wouldn't be prosecuting victims for that kind of activity. Who knows what the future might hold? So it's not very cut and dry, and I encourage people not to judge victims whether they choose to pay or not. But obviously, like anyone else, we would discourage people from paying because it does encourage more of this activity.
How successful has the extortion piece of this been for these threat actors? I mean, are enterprise victims responding to that threat of, pay us an extra amount, or we're going to release your financial data or your employees' HR data?
You measure that, right? Like, I've been measuring it by looking at how many people's data are they actually publishing on some of these dark websites that suggest that they haven't paid. Yep. And I think it's getting a lot more press attention than it's necessarily getting traction with victims actually paying, but I don't have a scientific way of measuring
that. Maybe that, just as a segue into that, we had a great conversation, when we were kind of doing prep for this about just all the ways that IR, like incident response and incident management has changed. And that's what you all were both just talking about is maybe the best example of that ever. There's just this whole calculus and even, entire businesses and industries are kind of niches within IR that are cropping up to help people deal with all this kind of stuff, right? How do you, as a board or as a risk management entity, how do you think about extortion? And I think anecdotally, it seemed like early on, and this might just be a product of how it was reported. I have no data to back this up, but anecdotally, you started to hear about extortion as a tactic, and then you heard about massive payments, right? You're definitely starting to see, just keeping an eye on Maze activity and stuff like that is one group that happens to, again, they're very PR hungry, and so they're very forthcoming with information. It's been interesting to see what seems to be a trend in just increasing dumps of data, meaning, to your point, Jack, people aren't paying, right? It's definitely not one or the other, but it's just all of this stuff has changed so much in terms of, I'm guessing percentage of people that pay, how you think about it, as a business, figuring out, all right, if this segment of data gets lost, must pay. If this other segment of data gets lost, maybe pay. And it's in every, kind of every dimension of this, from the victims, and I think even as entities that are helping to defend and respond against this stuff, really good examples of just all of the new things that everyone has to think about every single time one of these events, whether you're planning for it or whether it occurred.
Throw in a little GDPR and CCPA and decide from that. I mean,
Yeah, the number of factors that the victim organizations now have to consider is just, yeah, it's growing exponentially, and it doesn't seem like it's going to slow down anytime soon. One of the things I wanted to throw out there before we wind things up is we were talking about the commoditization earlier and how easily available a lot of these ransomware kits are, kind of like the phishing kits and exploit kits, over the last 15 years or so. Do you still see specific, again, not going down the attribution path, but do you still see specific strains of ransomware tied to specific groups, or is it just kind of splattered all over the map these days?
Mappings are pretty tight in general. I mean, certain groups use the same entry into the network over and over and over again. There's groups that exclusively just scan for open RDP and break in that way. They generally use similar tools. We often write blog posts if that changes, because we want to share that with other researchers and people who are doing incident response, where one particular group may repetitively, after getting in, use certain shell commands to dump the Active Directory information, and then they PowerShell this, and then they move laterally with, they use Mimikatz to steal credentials. There's a sort of a template that group uses, and they usually stick to it for reasonable periods of time, and when that changes, it's noteworthy that it changes, because they are quite consistent in my experience. Not every group necessarily, but in general, there seems to be a playbook that they're following.
That makes sense. I mean, if something is working, there's not a great reason to go away from it, especially if there's a lot of money involved.
Well, I think most of the time it's depending on the victim doing threat hunting to discover after the initial breach, while the criminal is rooting around and trying to find the sensitive data they want to lock up. That's your window of opportunity, right? You can't always stop the initial entry. It's almost impossible. We've got too many humans involved. We're going to make mistakes. But once they're in, they're not just pushing the button and triggering the ransomware in an hour. Wendy mentioned weeks, months sometimes, that they're hunting around for how they're going to cause the most damage to twist the knife. And that's lost opportunity if you're not threat hunting. If you're threat hunting and you're actually paying attention to even your legitimate admin tools and whether they're being used by admins at expected times and places that you would expect them to be used, is enough often to trigger you to their presence. And if you're hunting for that presence, I think you have a reasonably good chance of being successful. And that ransomware survey that we did, where I was talking about the cost of paying the ransom or not, in that same survey, about 20-some% of the respondents globally said they were able to stop at least one ransomware attack in its tracks before any data was encrypted. That's encouraging. I mean, 1 in 5 is a bad number, but 1 in 5, I think, is a lot higher than it would have been a few years ago. I think more organizations are paying more attention. As all of us are gaining EDR tools and starting to partner with security providers who maybe can add a layer of intelligence that is too hard to gather on your own, we're having increasing rates of success if we keep going down these paths.
Yeah, when we were talking earlier about that question, which is should I go implement thing A, B, or C, right? If detection, building out really good detection and incident response capabilities, whether you partner with someone to do it or whether you do it yourself, awesome takeaway, right? Which that is the absolute best thing you can do, because if you do that, whether it's ransomware or whether it's the next threat, right, you're better for it forever. If you just build some depth, these things are muscles, right? You got to do it every single day, or you have to find someone to help you. And it's just tools are better than they've ever been. Incident response providers are they're we've seen so much of this now that those processes, they're definitely they're multivariate and a kind of a bit of a disaster of a flowchart to think about. But on both sides, I think we're getting much better at each of these things, as an industry. And if you're protecting an enterprise, building out solid visibility, on endpoints, understanding who's accessing data, build good robust detection capabilities, and then make sure you're prepared for an incident, again, through your either internally or through a partner. Those things are they're a benefit to the organization forever. And if you just start doing them today, hopefully you don't have to worry so much if tactics change or if what they want changes, right? It's a good kind of abstract way to think about it.
Yeah.
If you're looking, you've got a good chance of finding them. If you're not looking, you will not find them.
Well, I think we're pretty much up against our time limit here, but I wanted to thank you all so much for joining us and sharing everything that you all learned with us. This is great. And thanks everyone who's been watching. We really appreciate it. And I hope to see you guys in person at some point soon once this is all over.
Look forward to it. Thanks for having us.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Bye.
All right. Thank you so much to Dennis and all the rest of our panelists. That was amazing. And I got a couple songs as we head out of here for you guys. Starting with this. They don't care who they get, just as long as they hurt you. This one right here is a little bit more on the bright side. Safe and Sound by Capital City.
I can lift you up. I can show you what you want to see and take you where you want to be. You could be my luck.
Even though this was for enterprise organizations, I really learned so much in this panel
We'll be safe and sound.
about things I need to do to protect myself,
We're safe and sound.
be a little bit more safe across the board.
I can fill your cup. You know my river won't evaporate. This world we still appreciate. You could be my luck. Even in a hurricane of frowns, I know that we'll be safe and sound. We're safe and sound. We're safe and sound. We're safe and sound.
This is my last theme song of this set. This one is Locked Up by Akon. Now, I know he was talking about being locked up in jail, but I want you guys to keep that data locked up and make sure it's safe and sound. Keep those backups going and keep them offline. That's what I learned.
I'm steady trying to find the motive. Why do what I do? And freedom ain't getting no closer. No matter how far I go, my car is stolen. No registration. Cops patrolling. And now they done stop me and I get locked up. They won't let me out. They won't let me out. I'm locked up. They won't let me out. No. They won't let me out. I'm locked up. They won't let me out. You know what? They won't let me out. I'm locked up. They won't let me out. No. They won't let me out. Play on, play on.
This is a favorite for just about everyone. No Diggity, Blackstreet, Queen Prin, and Dr. Dre. Let's go.
It's going down, fade to Blackstreet. The homies got at me, collab creations. Bump like agony, no doubt. I put it down, never slouch. As long as my credit can vouch, a dog couldn't catch me. Say out. Tell me who could stop with Dre making moves, attracting honeys like a magnet, giving them orgasms with my mellow accent. Still moving this flavor with the homies Blackstreet and Teddy, the original rough shakers.
Shutting it down, good lord. Baby got 'em open all over town. Strictly bitch, you don't play around. Cover much grounds, got game by the pound. By no means average, it's on when she's got to have it. Baby, you're a perfect 10. I wanna get in, can I get down so I can? I like the way you work it, no diggity. I got to bag it up.
I want to give a shout out to Stellar Blog who said, Brent,
I got to bag it up, girl. I like the way you work it.
if anybody else has any more comments, I would love to give you a shout out if you're out there.
I like the way you work it. No diggity. I got the.
We got a few more. Help you keep that the day going. Pick up the energy just a little bit.
In my stones, let it rain. I hydroplane in the bank, coming down like the Dow Jones. When the clouds come, we gone. We Rockefeller, we fly higher than weather, and cheap vibes are better. You know me, in anticipation for precipitation, stack chips with a rainy day. Jay, Rain Man is back with Little Miss Sunshine. Rihanna, where you at?
You have my heart, and we'll never be worlds apart. Maybe in magazines, but you still be my star. Baby, 'cause in the dark, you can't see shiny cars. And that's when you need me there. With you, I'll always share. Because when the sunshine will shine together, told you I'll be here forever. Said I'll always be your friend. Took an oath, I'ma stick it out to the end. Now that it's raining more than ever, know that we'll still have each other. You can stand under my umbrella. You can stand under my umbrella. Under my umbrella.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in with me today. I want to thank all of our Cypher panelists, Dennis for hosting that panel. I want to thank him for inviting me in. And I want to thank you for tuning in and listening.
Here come bad news, talking this and that. Give me all you got and don't hold me back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm clap along if you feel like a room is no roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
If I tell you now, will you keep on loving me? If I tell you how I feel, will you keep bringing out the best in me? You give me the sweetest taboo. Giving me the sweetest taboo. Too good for me.
All right, this is the last song of my set. Little remix of The Supreme. I'm known for doing remixes every now and again. Once again, I am the Mangler.
DJ
Graffiti. Thank you so much.
I keep waiting, I keep on waiting, but it ain't easy.
easy. I need love to ease my mind. I need to find someone to call mine. But mama said you can't hurry love. No, you just have to wait. She said love don't come easy. It's a game of give and take. You can't hurry love. No, you just have to wait. You gotta trust, give it time. No matter how long it takes, but how many heartaches must I stand before I find the love to let me live again? Right now, the only thing that keeps me hanging on when I feel my strength, yeah, it's almost gone. I remember mama said, no, you just have to wait. She said love don't come easy. It's a game of give and take. How long must I wait? How much more can I take before loneliness will cause my heart to beat in?
I'm always down for a little extra credit. One more. This just seemed to fit so nice with the last song. Let's go.
Honey, honey, I can see the stars all the way from here.
I want you to enjoy your day,
Can't you see
your afternoon,
the
your
glow
evening, wherever
on
you
the
may be.
window pane? I can feel the sun whenever you're near.
Hope to see you back
Every
real
time
soon
you touch me, I just melt away. Now
for another
everybody
enlightening
asks me
Cypher
why I'm
event.
falling out from ear to ear. But I know nothing's perfect, but it's
You go
worth
ahead
it
and
after
subscribe
fighting
to
through
the
my
Cypher's YouTube channel.
tears.
Then make sure you hit that bell. You can get notified next time the Cypher is live.
You're the one I love. You're the one I need. You're the only one I see. Come on, baby, it's you. You're the one that gives your all. You're the one I can always call when I need to make everything stop. Finally, you put my love on top. Oh, come on, baby. You put my love on top, 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 top. You put my love on top. Oh, come on, baby. You put my love on top, 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 top. My love on top.
All right, thank you so much. You guys have a great one, and I will see you real soon.